Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're very welcome to the launch of our 4th annual Food and Agribusiness Report. My name is John Donoghue and I am Chief Executive at Ifac. Founded in 1975, Ifac is Ireland's farming, food and agribusiness specialist professional service firm. We have more than 450 professionals across Ireland looking after 20,000 clients from 30 locations. In a year of turbulence for businesses of all shapes and sizes, Ireland's food and agribusiness sector remains resilient and optimistic about the future. With more access to markets than ever before and unprecedented investment in the sector, this is a time of opportunity. Our report this year is focused on ESG, environmental, social and governance. Once to preserve a big business, ESG is now firmly on the agenda of small to medium enterprise. Consumers are hungry for information and they want business leaders to use their resources to drive positive climate change, social impact and good governance in their organisations. Our report is a great place for you to start your ESG journey. Many thanks to everyone involved in producing our report and our launch today. Special thanks to Minister Paschal Donoghue for attending also. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy our launch. Here is your host, Fran McNulty.
Thank you, John. Good morning and welcome to the launch of the Ifac Food and Agribusiness Report for 2021. This has become an annual event. We'd usually rather be sitting down now after chatting over coffee, but as the COVID cloud remains this year, again, we're webcasting the event. I know for many of you it's more convenient, but I know I miss events like this where we can all sit and chat. So let's hope this time next year we're back on track. It's no exaggeration to say that this important report is giving us a detailed and much anticipated insight into the food and agribusiness sector. So given the year we've had, we're sure to learn more than usual. We joined shortly by the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donoghue, and later by a panel giving us a view of producers, the supply chain and of course banking. But first, the Head of Food and Agribusiness at Ifac, David Layden, gives us an overview of what's in this year's report.
Thank you, Fran. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and you're very welcome to the launch of the annual Ifac Food and Agribusiness Report. As the title says, this year's focus is on ESG, environmental, social and governance factors, and how they impact on SMEs in the food and agribusiness sector. So this is the 4th year of the Food and Agribusiness Report. It's a sentiment survey, so we've been tracking the sentiment of businesses across the sector since 2018. We work with Amoric Research on this and we interview over 200 owners and managing directors in businesses. So what is ESG? It's a term that's not overly used by SMEs currently. It started off with the asset management companies, the BlackRocks, the Amundis of this world, and it has made its way to PLCs and now SMEs. The term covers the main sustainability areas: environmental sustainability, for example, renewable energy and water management; social sustainability, for example, employee benefits and impact on local communities; and governance, board governance and diversity, and stakeholder engagement, for example. And I suppose, why is it important? So it's really important, and there's really 3 key reasons. The consumer is focused on ESG. They mightn't refer to it as ESG, but they are thinking about those ESG factors such as sustainable packaging. They're thinking about the environmental footprint of the products that they choose to purchase, and they take some notice of the social impact companies have in their communities. From a supply chain perspective, especially for B2B companies, if you are ESG positive, you will have a better chance to secure business with larger organisations who have a strong ESG focus. If you're weak on ESG, you're weak on the environment, you're weak on social sustainability, your chances of winning bigger contracts and maintaining those contracts will be diminished. And finally, from a finance perspective, your bank is going to assess you from an ESG point of view. They will have green loan books and brown loan books, and they will want to lend to greener organisations. We'll hear more about this later. So it's going to have an impact, it's got a commercial angle, and it's definitely beginning to gather momentum. So a couple of stats on ESG. For 39% of food and agribusiness SMEs, ESG is currently high on their leadership agenda. Currently, ESG is more prominent on the leadership agenda of medium-sized businesses in comparison to smaller companies. However, we do see that 87% of companies are making positive climate change actions. They're managing waste, they're choosing sustainable packaging, or they're working with environmentally conscious suppliers. They're opting for energy efficiency like solar panels. So again, they're taking positive climate change action. They might not necessarily be calling it ESG activity, but there is definitely a lot of positive activity in the sector. So now for some additional key takeaways from the report. Optimism is something that we have tracked every year, and in comparison to last year, levels have rebounded to a 4-year high. After being very low in the middle of the pandemic last year, food service reopening, strong farm gate prices, they're all contributing to this bounce back in optimism. In terms of revenue, costs and margins, the big story from this part of our research is that costs have increased. Any organisation who buys steel or timber or who buys packaging knows that their costs have increased significantly. That's going to filter through to the consumer as costs are increasing across the board. This is the most significant cost increase we have seen since we started the research. In terms of sales, the Republic of Ireland is still the most important market for SMEs. However, 55% of companies have some exposure to international sales. And we see that in terms of Brexit, 64% of companies have been negatively affected. Transport, tariffs and access to raw materials are the biggest factors. For some companies, it's accessing suppliers. For others, it's using the land bridge to continental Europe to deliver perishable products, and that's taken a lot of time. As you know, there will be more Brexit changes in the coming months, causing further challenges. In terms of employment, 98% of companies intend to maintain or grow current employee numbers over the next year. However, 2/3 are finding it difficult to recruit people. So who are they finding it difficult to recruit? It's the whole range. It's from people in manufacturing and production, it's welders, it's finance professionals, it's marketing professionals. So it's really across the board that there's a challenge to find the right people to grow an organisation. We've heard a lot about digital transformation over the past 18 months. One element of this transformation piece is online trading. 3 out of 10 businesses are trading online. We believe there's an opportunity for both B2C and B2B businesses in this space, and it's really worthwhile to keep building that digital muscle in your organisation. In terms of paytech, it's a new section in this year's report. Bank transfers, cheques and cash still dominate. Cheques actually still account for the majority of payments in the agribusiness sector, with 73% of agribusinesses using cheques regularly. Why? Most farmers are fairly fond of their chequebook. However, we have seen that food and agribusinesses are beginning to work with the likes of Stripe and Revolut, and we will track these changes over the coming years to see how these change and evolve. In terms of the COVID impact, 55% of SMEs view changing consumer habits as the most significant lasting impact of COVID-19. What does that look like? It looks like changes in food service, changes in home delivery, changes in how people make decisions, with digital adoption accelerating. Research and development is very important in any organisation. It drives new product development and new service offerings. Over half of businesses are investing in formal R&D. As the business develops, it tends to invest more in R&D as staff and financial resources grow. Access in R&D tax credits is sensible and something we encourage strongly with our clients. Nearly half of businesses have no succession plan in place. This is a real challenge. Our head of tax, Declan McAvoy, will always say the best time to plan for succession from a tax perspective is 7 to 10 years in advance. So taking the time to plan how you will transition the business to the next generation, or an MBO or a trade sale, is very worthwhile. Finally, for the key takeaways section, strategic planning is important. 21% of companies in the sector have a strategic plan. For those who don't, we believe that this is a missed opportunity. We understand why it doesn't happen. Small management teams under pressure, dealing with COVID, talking about strategic planning, not on the agenda. However, in a quickly changing world, with lots of risk as well as opportunity, investing the time to think about the future and develop a plan for how your business is going to thrive will be rewarding. We're here to help in that process. A final few comments before we get to the Minister for Finance and our panel discussion on ESG. Too few SMEs are accessing state supports which are available to them. That's why we've developed this guide highlighting the most common supports accessed by food and agribusinesses who are growing and developing, who are building and entering new markets. The agencies, the local enterprise office and Enterprise Ireland are there to help you grow, and in many cases have made a very positive impact on companies we deal with. We'd be more than happy to speak with you about any of the supports listed. Finally, we interviewed Aramar Kukatai of Finisterre Ventures. He's a San Francisco-based investor in the food tech and ag tech sector and was a dairy farmer based in New Zealand. He offered really interesting perspectives on IP commercialisation, alternative dairy, and how agribusinesses need to be aware of the wave of capital that is flooding into the ag tech space. It's worth a read for startups that are growing fast, but also for executives in existing legacy food and agri-businesses, because disruption is around the corner for all of us. Please get in contact with Ifac at any stage. We would be delighted to hear from you. Many thanks to all those who took the time to tune into our launch this morning, to all who contributed to the report and this event, and especially my own team. You can download the report on ifac.ie now, and I'll hand you back to Fran. Thank you.
Thanks, David. We're joined now by the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donohoe. Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Fran. How are you today?
I'm good, and thanks for joining us.
Not at all.
We'll move on to the report today, and one of the big dominant themes through this report is ESG. And this sector, the agri and food business sector, is really staring down the barrel of needing to do more on this. What about the sector and businesses generally? What should, from a government perspective, ESG mean to this sector?
From a government perspective, ESG has a very clear message running through it, which is that sustainability is going to be vital, not just to the future of businesses, but also to the future of our environment. And there are many moves afoot now, both at European and national level, to continue to make this as clear as possible, and then at European level introduce greater consistency and transparency regarding how ESG is understood. What's really interesting about the report that forms the background to our event here this morning is how a very large minority of businesses in this sector already understand this. I think it's around 39%, which is a big improvement on where we were, but we need to look at how we can move that forward again. It's not just a matter for government, it's a matter for all of us. This is too existential an issue to pretend or indicate that it's only the responsibility of government, and that's already understood, particularly by all who are involved in agri-food and meeting the food and nutrition needs of consumers.
People in the sector talk about, they know what they need to do, they know the direction this needs to go in, but in particular for small and medium-sized enterprises, it is costly, it is burdensome. Will there be assistance for people in the SME sector to start looking towards ESG and start fulfilling their obligations?
Well, there's a huge amount of support already made available for those in the agri-food sector to help with all the different costs they have to deal with, to support them in the innovation, the training that is necessary for their own future. But this is too big, this is such a big challenge that government support or not, this is what we have to respond back to. And we need to, I think, move away from saying, you know, there is a challenge here, there's a challenge here that I need government support to respond back to. That level of support is there. But this is literally about the future of our humanity in the context of a great crisis that we face, which is what's happening with climate, what's happening with our ecology. And it is what consumers will be demanding, it is what investors will be requiring. Government will always look to play its part in helping with dealing with cost, but this is now a core, mainstream, vital issue that, in fairness, businesses that are surveyed in this report, many of whom already understand, the majority of which are already either planning to act on, or a large minority already are.
You mentioned climate change there. Despite the significance of this sector to the economy, and it is hugely significant employment terms, in terms of the revenue, the taxation it creates, in some aspects, it's under huge criticism from a climate change perspective from campaigners who say the contribution of this sector to our emissions is much higher than it should be. There are even calls for us to do less in this area. How do we strike a balance between continuing to keep this sector as relevant and buoyant and employing people, and also looking at those climate change requirements? Because they are two issues which need to be dealt with at the same time.
But they're increasingly going to become two sides of the same coin. What I believe is going to happen is that from the point of view of consumers and from the point of view of customers, this is going to become a mainstream requirement they will have for future purchasing, and it's already a big element in purchase decisions that are being made today. And where I think we're going to get to a lot quicker than I might feel at the moment even, is that when more and more businesses are making decisions regarding how they meet the needs of their consumers, the meeting the needs of the consumer will involve how this agenda is delivered. And yes, you are correct to say that surrounding all of this, there is criticism and there is a lot of analysis regarding whether enough has been done. But that's the feature of any public policy debate that we're in. It's the feature of any big change in any industry or any economy. There will always be those who will say not enough has been done or the efforts are not successful. And we need to listen to them and we need to challenge ourselves to see if they're right. Because those voices were loud a few years ago, and they were right a few years ago, that we were not doing enough. And we have to be honest, therefore, in appraising our efforts.
What about our efforts with comparison to our EU counterparts? You sit with your European finance minister colleagues around the table. I'm sure ESG and all of this gets discussed. How are we performing and how do we need to perform in line with our EU counterparts?
So there is one distinct area in which we're very different to our finance minister, to many of my finance minister colleagues, which is the commitment that we've already made to increase carbon pricing budget after budget until we deliver the targets we have to deliver of taxation per gram of carbon emission. Very few countries have made that commitment and very few countries have implemented many moves with regards to that, and we've already done two and we'll do another one in the approaching budget. And for all of the challenges that we do face and the criticism that is there of us, that is a very distinctive feature of where we stand at the moment. In relation to other areas of difference, an obvious area in which we are different to most, but have a lot in common with a minority on, is how important food production is to our economy. And because of, as you'll know, and the viewers will know, because food production forms such a large part of our economy, it does pose a different set of transition challenges to what other countries would face. So, two areas of difference: carbon pricing, a very important area of difference, and then the structure of our economy is different to many, which in turn then poses additional challenges for the years ahead, but also some opportunities.
Are they challenges we can deal with, or perhaps do we need to look at what we do and how we do it to help deal with them?
We need to do both, because it's actually by only looking at what we do and how we deal with these kind of challenges that we're going to be capable of meeting the agenda of ESG and environmental sustainability that runs through this report. And we have to continually challenge ourselves to see are we doing enough. But frankly, if there's any part of our society and our economy that is capable of doing that, I believe it is agri-food, it's the supply of food from the Irish economy. Because if I look at the change this part of our society and economy has gone through in recent years, it's tremendously agile, it's tremendously innovative. And while it has a very high number of businesses that are family owned, it has a very high SME share of the overall kind of pot of enterprises. That's never stopped innovation and never stopped change. But that innovation and change is going to need to continue now for other reasons.
What about us as consumers? There was a piece in the Financial Times the head of Maersk wrote 2 or 3 days ago saying that there are supply chain issues, and unless consumer demand slows down, we're going to have issues in supermarkets, on our shelves, in terms of food, come Christmas, come the early part of the new year, impacts of COVID, Brexit, everything else. What can we do, or what sort of a challenge could that pose to the food sector here? Yeah,
well, that's an economy-wide challenge, actually. So I would see that, while of course being a challenge for food, it is one we're facing now, the global economy is facing. Whether it's semiconductors, whether it's cars, whether it could even be the supply of certain food products. This is now a growing post-high pandemic environment challenge. In terms of what we will do, what consumers will be doing, this is one of these cases in an economy where actually supply is going to influence demand. It's normally the other way around, but actually what is going to happen here is, in effect, because supply is going to be constrained, it is going to ration demand, because the opportunity for some products won't be there in the way it was in the past. Out of all the different challenges that we would face, I do suspect, though, that food within Ireland will be a sector that will be able to respond back to this challenge far better and far more flexibly, And I'm optimistic this might be the kind of the least of the supply challenges we might face here in Ireland.
Let's go from the global to the Irish economics. The summer economic statement set out certain spending plans, laid out the financial realities for us. We know our tax take is better. We know corporation tax is looking good. As Finance Minister, are you looking now at potentially increasing spending, dealing with taxation? What changes are you looking at as a result of how the realities, the financial realities, have changed?
I'm not looking at any further changes. We published our summer economic statement there before the summer. That lays out our multi-year spending and taxation plans for the next few years. Things have improved since then, but that's not going to lead to a change in our framework because some of the changes that have happened since June, I've no guarantee those changes are going to be permanent. And my focus is absolutely now on ensuring that by 2023 we have eliminated all the high levels of borrowing that we had to put in place to help us respond back to COVID. That is one of the reasons why we're making changes in the pandemic unemployment payment this week. We have borrowed €34 billion more than we were planning to help us deal with COVID. To eliminate all of our borrowing across a single budget, I think could be economically risky. To attempt to do it over 3 budgets creates the political risk that it will never happen. So doing it over 2 budgets, which is what the government has agreed to, I believe is a sensible and safe way of dealing with it.
So despite an extra billion possibly in corporation tax, it won't make a difference, is that what
There's
you're saying?
every prospect that extra billion could be gone by 2023. We already have risks in the reliance that we have on corporate tax. In a world in which COVID hadn't existed, we would have already been running another surplus for another year in a row. And indeed, some may have claimed that surplus wasn't big enough. So even though the extra money has come in corporate tax, there's every possibility that in a couple of years, Fran, if you and I are sitting here talking about this issue again, that corporate tax revenue, the additional bit won't be there.
I'm just thinking politically what that feels like, because, OK, you've had to spend all this money on COVID. Imagine you hadn't, and you have taxation improving like this. As a politician, and we know what happens ahead of elections in terms of taxation and spending, it must be frustrating, is it, to find yourself in the position you do now with the economics as they sit?
Well, actually, in the run-up to the last election, the government didn't do what other governments had done in the past. So in the immediate run-up to the last election, we didn't increase spending, we didn't increase our plans to reduce taxes or increase social welfare payments because we were in the face of a no-deal Brexit. And as to where I feel now, actually, to be very honest with you, as I'd always try to be, out of all the feelings I have at the moment about where we are economically in dealing with COVID, frustration is not one of them. What I feel at the moment, looking at where we are in our economy, is a growing sense of relief that the huge damage that was being done to employment is now beginning to lift. We've every prospect of having fewer than 100,000 people on the pandemic unemployment payment by early October. I remember when that figure was 640,000. So to see that change happen is one I'm tremendously relieved to see happening. And while our borrowing figures are beyond what I could have comprehended in a non-COVID environment, they are lower than I expected them to be, and indeed forecast them to be last April. So that is really positive. But as we look beyond 2023, we will have different challenges and issues that we will need to consider, and we'll need to start thinking about that early next year.
All right, Minister Paschal Donoghue, thank you for
Thanks,
speaking
Fran.
to us. Thank you. That was the Minister speaking to us earlier this morning. He had hoped to be here live, but Cabinet demands got in the way, and as we speak, he and the Cabinet are meeting at government buildings. But I'm glad to say we've got some more expert views with us. David Layden joins us again. Also here is Sean McHale of Bank of Ireland, and on the line, joining us, as a lot of people have been joining meetings over the last few months by Zoom, Audrey O'Shea of Glanbia and Niall Harty of All Real Nutrition. Thanks to all of you. David, if I can start with you, this focus on ESG, I had a thought earlier this morning and last night about, you know, that guy sitting on the bus saying, I don't know what a tracker mortgage is. You know, a lot of people who are listening to us and watching us this morning know what ESG is, but why focus in such detail on it in this report? Because you really do concentrate on it.
Yeah, the key reason, Fran, is because it's growing relevance. So initially ESG was a big thing in the asset management community and didn't really make much of an impact on the SME community. Then it filtered down into the PLCs, and now it's really beginning to filter into the SME world. So for food and agri-businesses, it's now time to take cognizance of what ESG is. It's not really just about sustainability in an environmental context, it's also about sustainability in a social context, and sustainability in a governance context.
So you spoke a little bit earlier on about how SMEs are viewing it now. In your view, are they aware enough? Is there enough of an awareness there about the importance of it?
I think the term ESG probably hasn't filtered fully into the food and agribusiness SME community, but it's very much the activity that's involved in ESG is in place. So we see, a lot of environmental activity. We saw in the report, 87% of organisations are taking environmental actions. So that's definitely happening. So they're taking action, but it's maybe not using the terminology ESG, and that's maybe something that we want to highlight in the report, that you need to start using that terminology.
Niall, I might go to you on that. As somebody running an SME in this sector, how has it played a role? How has ESG played a role for you?
Well, I suppose for us, it's gone more than just having a great product. We're very, very early stage food brand. Okay, so we're an impact-led sports nutrition brand selling here in Ireland, and we have a fantastic product. But I suppose the writing on the wall for us, and as the Minister said, we're now trying to meet consumer demands. 66% of consumers now want sustainable packaging because they see the impact it's having on the planet. And consumers are now 4 times more likely to support a purpose-led brand. I think that's what kind of put our thinking together and creating All Real Nutrition. So I said we're an impact-led natural sports nutrition brand. We manufacture natural protein bars here in Kerry. All our packaging is certified plastic free. We're the only one in the entire confectionery category that's certified plastic free. And every single bar sold removes and prevents 1 plastic bottle from entering the ocean. So for us, it's more than just having a title. It's what we live and breathe as a brand.
It's obviously a selling point for you, but it is more than just a marketing tool. Is it actually core to your business and the ethos of what you're doing? Yes.
So I'd launched a previous brand, Origin Protein Bars, a natural product, and it was doing well for us, but we really wanted to make a real impact, in terms of, being able to stand out more on shelf. But as us as young brand owners, we want to lead the way and show this is possible for the bigger brands to create real impact in terms of what they're doing. So we're very focused on socially doing events, getting community together, but also creating impact on the planet around us through our packaging. So every time someone purchases one of our products, instead of a competitor product, it's 1 less piece of plastic, and also we are preventing 1 plastic bottle. So it's creating this huge impact, not both locally, but also globally.
You're making us hungry the more you wave those bars in front of us now. Audrey, to you, that's the view of an SME. What about a big company like Glanbia? What role is it playing? I want to talk to you in a moment about how SMEs should be aware of their interaction with Glanbia about it, but what role is it playing in Glanbia?
Yeah, well, certainly for us, as you might be aware, Glanbia Ireland DAC is owned 40% by Glanbia PLC and then 60% by the co-op. So it's having a huge role in terms of investor queries with respect to the PLC and with respect to the share price. But for a company such as ours, where we export more than 90% of everything that we produce to the multinationals like the Nestle's, like the Unilevers, like Diageo, it's having a huge impact. Because what it's really about is certainty, dependency, and resilience. So you spoke earlier, and the Minister spoke about resilience within supply chains. The large customers want to make sure that you're able to deliver, that you're not just able to deliver on a fantastic product with fantastic quality, but that actually you're able to get there on time, but that you also have the trust, transparency behind that, and that you have all the proof points so that you can support their brands and their brand reputation.
So that's the I suppose the view of the big company, a massive company, and what you're saying around your customer base and your clients is understandable. I'm looking at it now this morning, in particular because of our audience, from the perspective of SMEs, from people who are supplying you. What is it you need from them? How is it changing that relationship? And in a way, how can it advantage them to deal with ESG in terms of how they deal with you?
Yeah. So look, it's really important. So our customers ask us to do a certain level of reporting, and that goes all the way back right onto the ground. So when I think about our 4,500 dairy suppliers, for example, and all of the agri sector and supports that they have around them, and all the SMEs and the different workspaces that they kind of move into, they all need to have full transparency and need to be aligned to the message and what we're trying to deliver. When I think about, our manufacturing sites and the supports that, our corporate governance teams want, or the manufacturing. So in terms of technology, in terms of supply chain and logistics, in terms of the packaging that we put on our products, as Niall spoke about, lab testing, audits, there's a whole industry. So anything that you think of in Irish society, that's almost kind of the wheel that a Glanbia needs as well. The cleaners that we have. So, for example, we had an audit not over a month ago, and it comes down to responsible recruitment and the certainty that we have around contractors, that we have fair business practices, labour and ethics. So it's very important that anybody we engage with, it's almost like a strategic partnership, and that we have open book, because really we now need to get really under the bonnet and see the mechanics that turn the wheels in all the organisations. And that's what our customers expect, because at the end of the day, it is about brand reputation.
Sean, what about from the banking perspective? And we see figures in the report about people looking for finance and the success rate of such. From your own perspective, how do you look at people who are coming in, either seeking funding or looking for assistance with regard to this?
So in terms of ESG, we would see it very much as transforming the banking landscape and the general finance landscape. And I guess there's three drivers to that. The first is regulation. The regulators tell us that this is quite clearly a systemic risk. What that means in layman's terms is it has to be put at the very centre of the banking operation, and that, and fed into our loan criteria all the way through to our own operations and that. So when we assess things, we have to put that lens on it. The second piece, of course, is what's happening at the EU level. Everyone understands the EU Green Deal, but the key component from a financing perspective is that there's a requirement for 500 billion a year out to 2030 to be funded, so we could transform the economy from a high carbon economy to a low carbon economy. And very much at the backbone of that are SMEs. So the transition will only work if SMEs are at front and centre. And of course the third component is what customers want. So obviously we heard from Niall and Audrey in that in terms of what they're seeing on the ground. We very much see the same thing. That's why when we launched our Sustainable Finance Fund, it was launched at $1 billion, now it's at 5 billion, and that's over the space of just a couple of years in that. And again, we see demand for sustainable finance, sustainable financing products, so our clients and customers can transition to the new low carbon economy and avail of the opportunities that it's bringing.
When you talk about looking at it through that lens, explain to us what you mean, because a business before, if they were buying a tractor or a truck, you kicked the tyre, you said it is what it is, there's your 40 grand and you worked out a deal. Sure. What does the lens, what does that filter look like now?
So the filter has two primary components. One is transition, so the transitional risks, and what we mean by transitional risks is things like customer behaviours. Quite clearly from the report, which is fantastic, it clearly articulates that customers want sustainable products and that's the way they're moving to. So that's a risk for business that aren't on that journey. Equally, we have the Climate Action Bill. So we'll have legislative change, we'll have the carbon budgets and that, all of which will have an impact on business. And then we have the physical risks. And the physical risks are a little bit easier to understand, but they're very simple things like, where's your postcode? Are you in a floodplain? What impact would that have on your property or your building or your farm and that? So these are the risks now that need to be assessed and will become formally part of the assessment as we move forward with the climate stress test next year under the EBA, and of course then the green asset ratio, which again is where the regulator wants banks to publish, and will have to publish how much of their loan book is environmentally sound, and that's going to be across the whole sector, and that so people then can quite clearly see who's funding the transition, how they're funding it, and bring that level of transparency to the process that's badly needed.
David, don't insights like this, like we're getting this morning, really, they make this very real, that in some senses it may have been aspirational, corporate social responsibility was something that was bandied about years ago. This is actually bread and butter.
Absolutely. So where ESG might have been a high finance term before, now actually you see Audrey there in Glanbia looking at an SME supplier who cleans some of their manufacturing facilities through an S lens, through a social lens. You know, that I think that's quite a journey away from maybe what we thought ESG was a number of years ago. Sean is going to look at somebody coming in with a bank application, not purely on cash flows and and P&L and what the repayment capacity is, but also through the risk to the business. So, you know, when you talk about ESG, you often hear, you know, it is related to risk, so the risk to that company or that organisation in their sector. And from Niall's perspective, and I think he articulated it really well, you know, it's a new company, but they're using ESG and that whole idea of sustainability to drive their commercial footprint, to drive market share, to drive their routes to market, and to drive, you know, consumer behaviour. So, you know, where ESG, high finance, not that applicable to an SME, now that has moved on completely. And that's why really we focused on ESG in this report, because we think it impacts on every part of a business, even in terms of employer branding. If you're hiring a millennial now, they want to think that your organisation is doing good, that it's, you know, making a positive impact to community. So from that perspective as well, employer branding, I think it's important.
Just thinking PLCs, SMEs,
Yeah.
ESGs, it's alphabet spaghetti.
Acronym into this conversation as possible.
But Niall, to get to the nuts and bolts of it for you, and I think it'll be interesting for people to get an insight, because it's clearly something you've bought into, it's clearly something you've invested in. Has that been difficult? Or has it been more advantageous? How do you view your journey down this road?
Well, yeah, look, it has brought a lot of difficulties, but again, with pushing through difficulties come benefits. For example, our packaging, you know, we had to invest in a new packaging line, get material that would work properly with our product, keep it protected, but also, you know, deliver on our sustainability criteria. But what has that meant for us now? It means that we are selling incredibly well, and it's being received incredibly well by the consumer base, because again, like we did our research and the research hasn't lied. We've seen it coming through commercially that, you know, consumers are wanting to support products that have sustainable credentials.
Have we lost Niall there?
No, keep going.
Oh no, sorry, I thought we had dropped out. What I'm wondering is, we talked to the Minister about how SMEs could be assisted. Do you feel that there could be more assistance or should be more assistance?
Well, look, from the government's point of view, they're doing a good bit of work with the terms like Origin Green. So this is our national sustainability programme. And we're just going through that now for approval very shortly. And what that's done to us is giving us a robust supply chain, getting suppliers that are, you know, I suppose, are doing their bit as well. And, you know, bringing this more into the team and into the local environment. So locally here, supporting events around the local community, you know, and we often think of this stuff as, you know, the big, you know, change the world, but it's also about looking after ourselves internally. But yeah, look, there could be a bit more help from the government in terms of funding and finance. And I'm always going to say that because I'm a startup company and we do need funding and finance to help to grow. And, you know, there is great offerings there from banking and, you know, from private investment probably slow down a little bit now over the COVID, probably picking up a bit now. But yeah, look, we would always say the government can help a little bit more than just programs. You know, funding and finance is where it really helps the growth of early stage companies and helps us prosper, get to a point where we're employing more staff, growing the economy, and then get to the most important point for Ireland, getting brands that are exporting and bringing in that foreign money into Ireland and helping grow our economies.
I'm just wondering, when you talk to people like yourself who are starting out, who are in business in the locality, do you get the sense that others are tuned in or maybe aware of the kind of issues you've been dealing with?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I suppose, look, a lot of the, trendy startup brands that would be kind of the peers of mine are all looking down this lens as almost a must-have in your business to stand out from the typical, you know, as I say, bread and butter products that we use every day. You know, like I said, it's one thing having a great product, but you know, sometimes now to break through and get the accelerated growth we're looking for, just having a great product is not enough. It's having a great brand that consumers can really connect with. And like I said earlier, consumers are 4 times more likely to support brands that are mission-led and have a purpose. You know, like our mission is fighting against plastic. You know, we're set to remove over 4 million plastic bottles from the ocean this year through our initiatives. And we're an early stage startup, you know, so there's a lot that can be done that can help us on that way. But yeah, people are recognising it 100%.
Sean, when you're looking at businesses who are coming, how big a factor is this in your mind?
To us, it's becoming key and central, or core and central, when we look at businesses, when we look at how we do business in our own operations and that. So it's at the very, very forefront of our thoughts all the time, and that's right across the entire organisation, whether it be retail banking all the way through to our corporate banking arm, and that. And you know, as Niall mentioned there, this is being driven by customers. It's customer lens. People are voting with their pockets, and that. This is what they want to do. As David mentioned, you know, the whole staffing issue and that. If you want to attract and retain good talent, these are the questions they're asking you in the interview process and that, which is, a different mindset in that. But it just shows you how focused people are on this and this whole area and that. And of course, it's the big opportunity that it's going to bring and that. You know, I mean, the investment in energy is 1 to 2 trillion globally a year, all the way out to 2050 and that. We need to retrofit, you know, hundreds of thousands of homes and that. It's going to create huge employment, which of course the SME sector will deliver and thrive on, and that. So to us, it's very much how business is going to be done in the future, and that's already starting. We already see it coming through the numbers and that, and that's why we have a number of products out there, because it's better business. So it's not just nice, it's better business, and that's why we've reduced rates on our green loan products to business and that, because those businesses that are on that journey are more resilient, more profitable. And of course, the fundamental, or the first point of lending money, is that you want to get it back. So again, you know, to support those businesses into the next 5, 7, 10 years as they grow on that, it's absolutely critical to our business. And that's why, you know, we have to be front and centre in terms of supporting that transition from the high carbon economy to the low carbon economy. And that has to be SME led. And that, although, you know, as David pointed out, and Audrey, and that, it's really maybe at the corporate level we see it. But, you know, obviously, as already mentioned, that's trickling its way down under scope 3 is the terminology, where you're looking at the entire supply chain. So people are assessing even the smallest player in that chain, because they need to know what their environmental footprint is, because again, that now needs to be reported upon at the PLC level. That's what I was going to come to you next on, Audrey, the impact on the supply chain. Just talk to us, pick up on that point Sean was making there.
Okay, so for us, and look, Niall has mentioned Origin Green, and I'm delighted to be able to say that we were one of the founding members of Origin Green and are Origin Green certified. That aspect of it is so important to our customers. And under that, then we have the audit on every single farm for SDAS. It's the Sustainable Dairy Assurance Scheme. And that's where every single farm is audited. And that stands for the supplier certification aspect. But we now need to move kind of almost away from the farms and down to the other suppliers. So the suppliers of our packaging, the suppliers of any additional ingredients that we would have. We now are kind of gone out into, for example, looking at feed and the feed that our farmers are purchasing and where that comes from and where that's made and the provenance and the responsible sourcing of that. So it goes right across the entire supply chain down into the nitty-gritty. I mean, on a recent questionnaire, I was asked about the paper that we purchase for our offices and the inks and the cartridges. So it's really, when we do things like materiality analysis, where we go out and we want to have impact on the biggest hitting aspects. And for us, that would obviously be animal welfare and climate change. But when you get customer questionnaires asking, where do you buy your paper? Where do you buy your ink cartridges? Well, then that's when I have to say, okay, well, we've been dealing with the top end items, but this is actually what the customer is asking. And then I have to deliver a response to that customer. So it hits absolutely every aspect of what we do.
How far does it go, though, in terms of the climate change argument? Because we referenced it with the Minister. I mean, despite the importance of the agri-food sector to the economy and agriculture, it is constantly under scrutiny regarding emissions and everything else. How far does this go to helping address those issues from a corporate standpoint?
Yeah, from a corporate standpoint, and look, there's been an awful lot written across the summer about, what we need to do and the climate change crisis that we find ourselves in at the moment. And all we have to do is look across the water at recent events in New York and the floodings and Hurricane Ida and everything. So I think the first thing is, look, Ireland is an agri-food nation, and that's what we are, and that's what we're good at. And there will be a certain nuance then with respect to our greenhouse gases in relation to that. But I think if we look at the IPCC report that recently was published, and then look at the Science-Based Target Initiative and where they now say that we need to get to, it's only sustained carbon emission reductions allow long-term climate stabilization. And what does that mean? It means clean energy, renewable energies. It means, removing fossil fuels from our country and doing everything that we can do to remove fossil fuels. And it's about waste management. So this is where, as Niall spoke of, moving away from fossil-based plastics, having a circular economy with respect to your packaging and doing more with less. So, kind of while consumers will want things, I suppose we're very fortunate that we're all in the space where we're feeding consumers, whether that's kind of absolute necessary nutrition or whether it's an indulgent treat, but people will want to buy food. And in my mind, Ireland is the best place to source that food from.
On that point, David, in your presentation earlier and in the report, and it kind of stunned me, the number of people still using cheques is quite high. And that speaks to a culture and change. And whilst many other sectors have moved way beyond cheques, and I mean, I haven't had a chequebook in a couple of years. How difficult is it to bring smaller businesses on board, to convince them that these are things they need to do?
Yeah, well, there's a range. There's a range from Niall's business to maybe more traditional businesses. Again, the checkbook, farmers use a checkbook because it is handy. And farming, it's very handy.
Revolut is handy.
But Revolut is handy too. Not everyone is using Revolut yet. So we're going down that road. We do see, it's changing. This is the first year we talked about pay tech in the report because we're very conscious it's a really evolving space. We see Stripe beginning to be used. Anyone that's doing any sort of e-commerce, Stripe is generally the preferred platform at the moment. And people and finance professionals, they're getting their head around, the costs associated with Stripe versus an electronic transfer. So that is evolving. I think farmers have no problem changing. We've seen how farmers have adopted to technology. They're using technology the whole time, be it online media, be it pasture-based Ireland for measuring grass. The whole farmers will change and evolve, and the SME sector is evolving too. We see here that 87% of businesses are taking climate change action. They're doing the renewable energy, they're managing waste, they're purchasing sustainable packaging. So they are taking action. We need to keep motoring down that road, keep developing, keep driving that, so that when Nestle produce their 100-page glossy ESG report, that we can feed properly into that. Now, we're not saying in our report this year that an SME needs to do that 100-page glossy report. They don't. But what we're saying is you need to start thinking about it. Think about ESG. Think about the language that you're using around your environmental initiatives, around your social initiatives. So get on that ESG journey so that when you come in and meet Sean, you can talk Sean's language. When you're trying to be a supplier to Audrey, you can talk her language. I think that's pretty critical now.
It's the culture change is huge. You said something there, Sean, about a millennial coming in asking a job interviewee, asking the interviewer questions. To many of us, it's just totally foreign. Is that a reality of how the job market works now?
I think it's partly a reality. It's not for every role that's going, and it's not for every person. Not every person is concerned with the environment in every role, but there's definitely a leading edge there which is very, very concerned, and graduates. Look, at my experience of graduates is super, absolutely top operators. There'll be talk about graduates that young people today are X, Y, and Z. I don't buy it at all. They're super youngsters. They're super people, but they do care that you're involved in a decent mission, that you're doing the right thing. Niall talks about his mission, is to reduce plastic in the world. From an Ifac perspective, we are a cooperative working for our clients, working for farmers and for food and agribusinesses. That works for people because there is an ESG lens there. So I think it is important, and I think there's certainly a cohort of really good graduates that are thinking about that.
And I think it's really important because it shows that they're innovative, that they want to be cutting edge, and that they want to obviously help change, and that they're not coming in to do the same job for 20 years in that. And that's one of the attributes that you look for in an employee, in that have the flexibility, do they have the drive and the ambition in that. And to us that very much speaks to that. So when we hear those questions, they're the kind of candidates that we'd like to hear from, and that's what we hear across the board from the other banks operating here in Ireland.
Audrey, I just want to ask you something on that. One of the stats in the report is 67% of businesses found it difficult recruiting people. Is it an issue in the sector and for yourselves, finding people?
Yeah, so for us, look, we've grown over the last couple of years. We've been very lucky to kind of increase our employee workforce, but absolutely attracting talent and attracting the right kind of talent, can prove difficult. But look, and just say what the other panelists have said with respect to, being asked the questions. People coming in now are looking at the culture and behaviour of the company. They want to ensure that the values are aligned with their own values. Diversity, inclusion and belonging is a huge theme now coming through all of the organisations. And while many of the SMEs that we deal with are actually family-based SMEs, and a lot of the agri-businesses that we deal with are very much family-based, there is a sense of community, a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose, because at the end of the day, I think millennials in particular, but I think for all of us in the workforce, we want to make a positive contribution and to ensure that our roles matter. So it's a huge aspect today in terms of performance and looking at the reputation of the company and how you can, perform for that company, but also get the feel-good factor in terms of you've done a really good day's work and you've made a really positive contribution to society.
I can see you nodding to some of that now. As you build a smaller business and you hope to grow it and you hope to employ more people, do you see those as important, I suppose, foundation stones for you?
Absolutely. I mean, culture is one of the first things that myself and my co-founder looked at when it was just two of us sitting here in this office before we hired anybody. We wanted to create this place to be a really good place to work where people actually feel like they're making a difference. They're not just selling a food product, they're doing a whole lot more than that. And we're employing people from manufacturing, sales, marketing, finance, from all different disciplines, because we produce all the way to being a consumer facing brand. So we're really trying to create a good atmosphere and a culture as we grow to beyond 10 employees to 50, 100 and so on. As we start to become a big brand, we want to attract good talent and talent who fits in with our values and wants to make a change, as well as, grow their career and create stabilities for their own families.
So for somebody who might be watching today, Niall, and they're either starting out or they're in business already and they want to factor some of these things in. What advice would you give them?
I would say look at what aligns with your own values, because bolting something on is never really going to work unless it comes from the top down. And this, the whole idea of plastic is something myself and my co-founder Ross are very passionate about. And it's something that we've built in, even from, hiring our staff, our standard manufacturing staff are paid the living wage at minimum, because we feel that that is the right thing to do to create sustainable careers. If that was something we're just adding on because of that, it's not something we live and breathe, and it would just fall short and you get found out very quickly. So my advice is look within yourself, see what's really part of your core values, live and breathe it, and your culture and your company will live and breathe it.
I think that's really well put by Niall. He's a great client to have, and All Real are a great client to have, and we're delighted to support them because they are making a difference, and they're a new type of startup that are really thinking about their sustainability impact, and they have a commercial lens, make no doubt about it, but sustainability is absolutely core to what they're doing, and we really respect that and how they're operating.
All right, well, the last word to you this morning, David. Thanks also to Sean, to Audrey and to Niall, and thank you to all of you for joining us this morning, and to everybody for tuning in. Thanks also to the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donegan, for speaking to us earlier. The report is on the Ifac website now. You can get lots more detail on the social media platforms over the coming days and weeks as well. Thanks for watching, and good morning.